Scott and his family were at the Golden Trout Wilderness Pack Station, and this was in the Southern Sierras. They were there over Labor Day weekend. They were going to go horseback riding. At about 4 p.m., he, his wife, son, and daughter all heard this high-pitched whooping calls coming from the Forest Service access road just down the mountain. Immediately, the kids called back in the same manner. They all guessed it was another hiker, someone on horseback approaching the guard station and calling out just for fun. This went on for 15 to 20 minutes. As the calls became louder, his daughter, 8 years old, went down to this forest access road to greet this caller. Now later that night, Scott asked his daughter, he said, "Hey, who did you see coming up the trail this afternoon?" And she was timid in her response. She did not want to be accused of lying. And Scott and his wife are both physicians and they're trained in the scientific method, and they did not want to bait her answers. So he asked her, he said, "Okay, what was he wearing?" And she said, "Nothing." And then he said, "Okay, what color was his skin?" And she said, "Daddy, I don't know. He was all covered in hair and had really long arms." And then Scott asked her, he said, "Did he see you?" And she said, "No." And she went on to describe that this man had this really wide mouth, really broad shoulders, and he asked her about how it was walking, and she said, "Had these really big steps, Daddy." And Scott said his daughter was not prone to lying, was very brief and direct in her answers, and has no imaginary friends. And she also mentioned he was this much bigger than Scott, which would be over 7 feet tall. And so that night, Scott was laying in his tent, and he was thoroughly concerned for his family's safety at this point. And his daughter's words just echoed through his mind and just refused to fade. And they'd come up to the Sierras for a weekend of horseback riding, and now there was something out there in the forest at night that was unknown. The next morning, he and his daughter went back to this location, and he found these large human-like footprints in the powdery dust of the trail, and they had this very long stride. And she said, "Daddy, that's exactly where I saw him."